Yeah, Arthur Wharton was the world's first black professional footballer. We'd probably call him mixed heritage now, because he had Scottish grandparents on either side. But he was born in Jamestown, Accra, in 1865, and he was the son of a Wesleyan missionary that had come from Grenada in the Caribbean, and his mother was a West African woman. Arthur was born into an affluent family, actually, and he was a member of the extended family. They were the Grant family. His mother was the sister of F.C. Grant, who was the proprietor of the Gold Coast Times. So Arthur came from quite an affluent what was called a Euro-African family in what was then called the Gold Coast, now Ghana. In 1882, Arthur came back to Britain and he was enrolled as a student at the Shoal Hill College in Cannock, and he spent a couple of years there, and that's where we first read in the British press. It's where we first read about his sporting kind of exploits. But Shoal Hill closed in 1884, and then he went to another college called Cleveland College in Darlington. These were all Methodist institutions, and it was there really that his sporting excellence was shown and became noticed nationally. While he was at Cleveland College, he won the 3A's sprint championship in 1886, and this caused quite a big stir, amongst the kind of London-based sporting elite of the 3A's, the Amateur Athletics Association, because it was the first time, I think, a runner from outside London won the sprint championship, but it was definitely the first time a man considered as a black runner had been was champion. And at that time as well, in 1886, Arthur was also playing for Preston North End, which were considered, certainly by Preston themselves, they were considered the best team in the world, best team in Britain, if not the world, because nobody else was playing professional football at that time. So 1886 was kind of, Arthur was literally on top of the world. He was playing for the best football team in the world, in Britain, and he was sprint champion of Britain. Yeah, so Arthur was born into a well-off, affluent, upper-middle-class family in the Gold Coast, and when he was about 9, he was sent to Britain to be educated at a school in London, and that wasn't unusual. A lot of his extended family was sent to Britain to be educated, including his sister, which was unusual for an African woman to be educated in Britain. For a woman to be educated in Britain at that time was unusual, let alone a woman sent from West Africa. 3 years, from 1886 to 1888, Arthur was at the top of his sporting excellence, really. He retained his amateur sprint title the following year, in 1887. In 1888, he ran in the professional championships in Sheffield and won that. So he won 2 amateur titles, turned professional in 1888 and won the professional title in September. He was playing for Preston for 2 seasons as goalkeeper. His technique as a goalkeeper, when we look back at it now, and you look at it rationally, it was really clever. But at the time, he had an unusual style, an unusual technique. It was seen as him messing around. He was called a skylark. Like the newspapers were saying, when he gets in goal, he just messes around. And the word they used was skylark. But actually, what he used to do was crouch in the corner of the goal. Okay, and he'd lean against the post in the corner of the goal, and obviously the goal's unprotected. So people used to, he's not taking it seriously. But the rules about being a goalkeeper were different then. If you could be knocked over as a goalkeeper anywhere on the pitch, and goalkeepers could play anywhere on the pitch. They could handle it when he first started playing goal. Could handle it on the pitch. There wasn't like a goal area, and it was only there you could handle the ball. You could handle it anywhere on the pitch. So, but you were also allowed to be knocked over, shoulder charged over, anywhere on the pitch. So by leaning down in the corner of the goal, he wasn't allowing opposition teams, to knock him over, because if they knocked him over, there was an empty goal to shoot into. So what he used to do is he'd come out at the last moment and make himself big to make a save. The other thing he used to do was he would always, if he could, punch the ball out, and he was known as the goalkeeper with the prodigious punch. And he didn't always connect with the ball, you know. Sometimes it would be another round object on the top of somebody's neck, you know. But he was the reason for that was, again, that if you caught the ball, you became a target for the opposition to knock you over. So by punching the ball, you got rid of the ball, and you got it out of the danger area. A third thing he used to do, a third characteristic of his goalkeeping, was hanging onto the bar, pulling the bar down so the ball went over the top, you know, so literally making the goal smaller. So, you know, he was quite revolutionary in many ways with his goalkeeping techniques, and he's probably the first goalkeeper to wear, they're not really gloves, but they were leather arm protectors. He used to wear these big leather protectors that were worn in iron foundries to stop the men getting burnt when they were working near the molten metal, and but your hands were free. So there's photos. There's one particular photo of Arthur playing for Darlington with this big leather protector on, and probably the reason why was if you were on the ground and you had your hands on the ball, people would be trying to kick the ball, and they'd probably kick your arms as well. So that was another way that Arthur was unique in the kind of in his attitude that he brought to the role of goalkeeper. So, you know, he was in many ways, in more ways than one, an unusual character for British football. Not just because the colour of his skin, there weren't many players of colour around at that time, but the unique thing about Arthur was he was the first man of colour to play professional football and play in the Football League as well. He had a number of clubs such as Sheffield United, Rotherham Town, Stockport County, the ones that are still in existence, and also clubs like Stalybridge that are lesser known, but at their time were quite big clubs, Stalybridge and Ashton North End. And he retired from the game in about 1902, but he continued playing professional sport. He continued playing professional cricket, and he continued running. The last newspaper article that mentions Arthur's name in a sporting context is in 1925 when he ran a road race, and then he was 60, so he kept fit. And I remember we made we went to interview some people in the pit village that Arthur lived in for much of his life. After he retired from football, he became a miner, and he lived for about 15-20 years. He lived in a village called Edlington near Doncaster, and we interviewed some people that remembered him. They were in their 60s, 70s when we interviewed them. They remembered Arthur as children, and they were saying even then he used to ride his bike everywhere. He'd always be training at the miners' sports ground, and as I say, running the road race. So throughout his life he kept fit, and he continued playing sport at different levels. He had a sad end to his life, really, Arthur, because after his football career and after he could make money from his sports career, stopped. That the kind of professional running stopped in the late 1880s, and professional football stopped in 1902. He continued playing cricket, professional cricket, into the 1900s, but after a while, obviously, the income that he got from sport got less and less, and he worked underground at a number of pits. One, I think it's called the Fitzwilliam Colliery near Pontefract, another one at Wakefield, and the pit that he worked at the longest was called the Yorkshire Main pit, and that's in Edlington, near Doncaster. And although he'd stayed at college well into his 20s, and he actually became a tutor at Cleveland College, he was unable to get a job that fitted his education, really. And now that's a problem that many immigrants have, especially people of colour, that they take jobs where they're overqualified because lots of doors are closed to them. And that was certainly the case with Arthur. Once he tried to get a job outside of the sports industry, there weren't many doors open for him. He ended up working underground as a miner, and had quite a tragic end, really, because he died in a workhouse hospital, a sanatorium, and was buried in a third-class grave, which meant that he didn't get a gravestone. He was just buried, obviously, under a mound of earth, and for a good 60 years, over 67 years, in fact, he didn't have a gravestone until Football Unites Racism Divides in Sheffield and the PFA and Arthur's family helped to raise money to get a gravestone put on his burial place. It's a career. Arthur had a career that was full of contradictions. You know, he reached the top. He excelled in the sports that were important to him, running and football. But because he didn't go back to the Gold Coast, and if he had have gone back to the Gold Coast, he probably would have had a decent career, maybe working for his uncle's newspaper or working in the colonial service, although he did apply and was rejected for the colonial service. But he would have probably had a job that was typical of the background that he came from. But in Britain, because of the attitudes to him after his sporting days were over, he was unable to get a job that met his qualifications, so he ended up dying in poverty, really. So it was a sad end to Arthur's what was a fantastic sporting career.